Okay, welcome panel members. So that was a quick run through of the recommendations. We've had a little bit of time to process the unifying framework. And now is an opportunity for us to do a little bit more of engagement around the recommendations. I wonder if panel members could indicate if they feel like we ought to take a quick look at those slides one more time, or you have them in front of you.
I'm good.
You're good.
I'm good. I'm
okay,
good.
Great. Okay, terrific. Thanks. So we just wanted to open with any general comments or reaction to the set of recommendations as you have heard and seen them.
Well, I think many of the recommendations are excellent. I just wonder, I know compensation's at the middle of it, and I know compensation is the piece that's going to make all of the other pieces work. I just wonder how we're going to do that and how we intend to, if there are thoughts already being given to how, would this be state funded? Would it be district? Well, it can't be district, a school district, but how would we do that?
Yeah,
I like to be realistic. Do you know what I mean? And I want to move it forward as a realistic recommendation.
Yeah, and acknowledge that there isn't a current funding stream sufficient to move the work as we're describing it.
Absolutely. And, where do panel members and others need to begin to advocate? Do we need to go to the federal level? How do we do this? Because obviously we know, and we've known for years, that this is the one of the major issues. I'll just be very quick. It's very interesting because K-12, it is an issue on paying our teachers. The average beginning salary is lower than we want, but working conditions are also an issue, especially in our most challenged district. I'm not sure that working conditions are a challenge in early childhood. I mean, class size, materials, etc. But I'd like to hear more about that. But the salary definitely is. And I just want us to be realistic about what can we expect to move forward. I don't want to make a pie in the sky recommendation.
Deb, is it okay if I just weigh in with one?
I think so, Beth. I think it might help spur the conversation.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to respond to it.
Yeah,
It's a hard balance
please.
to strike here.
Well, I think it is important to respond because we've said this is primary, so that we're going to have some strategies, but these recommendations are the highest level. And then, in your email, you had deeper things. We don't have, 70% of these are private businesses. I see Jamie's here from Boehringer Ingelheim. The state doesn't tell you how much to pay your manufacturers, right? You decide that because you're a private business, and a lot of things are dependent on that. So I think that one of the recommendations at a sub level is to start with the state funded programs where we have some control, and also where there are public school OEC funds, public school programs that are paying at a higher rate. So partnering with public schools has been a strategy where with Smart Start, where the compensation is improved. So, those are two different opportunities that we see. And then Washington, DC, and I think Tennessee, there are a couple of places that we have some information about how they did it that we can share. But your question, Kaylin, you said you had the same question, is where do the funds come from? And also where we are today, one thing we have to figure out is we've increased infant toddler rates 50%. We've increased school readiness 20% in the current budget, and we've increased Care for Kids 11% a year for 3 years. We have to track the impact of that on wages. because up until now, directors have not had a steady group of funds to look at in the years ahead to project or give raises. So we don't know the impact of the 23, 24, and 25 budget yet on wages. So we're also be watching that. So just so people think it's, if you go a little deeper in the recommendations, you'll see that. And Fran, you may have some ideas from how, the teachers 30 years ago just had a bill that did something, I know, that raised wages across the state.
I think that helps me tremendously because I can think of lots of takeoff points from there.
Okay,
So
good.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Deb, I'm turning it back to you.
Okay, Beth, thanks. I think we're going to Jamie next. He has his hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. Maybe just picking up a little bit on Fran's comment around working conditions. And I say what I'm about to say, having spent my whole career in HR, so forgive me if that's coloring my view a little bit, but I'm generally skeptical when I hear compensation is the root cause of inability to recruit and retain, generally, in at least my experience. However, what I've learned from my participation on this panel is that the compensation system is pretty broken here. So I'm not disagreeing that this should be a central recommendation. What I was a little bit surprised about in the recommendation, particularly when it comes to retention, in my experience, retention is heavily influenced by the culture, by the, again, picking up on Fran's comment around working conditions, the experience that these early educators have in the work environment that they operate within. And so it could well be that pay and benefits is the central issue, but I do wonder whether if we could develop some type of recommendation that improved the working environment, made it an attractive place for somebody to develop their career, could that have a retention and a recruitment positive effect that if we can't go as far as we want to on pay and benefits might be a helpful element. That was what I wanted to just contribute. Thank you.
Can I jump in really quick on that?
Please.
Okay. I just want to concur, and a couple of things. I think because wages and compensation are so low that it actually is a barrier, and we hear that in all of the work we do around the country in focus groups and surveys. But you'd be startled, I think, at how, I don't even know if I should say this out loud, but when you ask early childhood educators, like, what are we talking about? We're talking about, $11 an hour to $19 an hour. We're not talking about a king's ransom. And so it is so low that it matters, but it is not, to your point, Jamie, like it's not like tripling it or something like that that's going to get us there. So not to diminish what kind of price tag is on it, but it's like going from $35,000 a year to $42,000 a year. Like, it's really low. And then I just want to echo and second, it is about the environment. And as France, it's different than in K-12, but there's still issues. I mean, when you have early childhood educators budgeted to be in ratio every hour of every day and have to call to get permission to have a bathroom break, that's culture and environment. When you have early childhood educators, because there's no requirement around licensing or credentialing, early childhood educators who have these layers and layers of coaches and all the things just hovering, they need practice autonomy. They want trust. They want practice autonomy. They want to be in an environment where they're free to do what they can do. They need to not work overtime every day and to have this like balance of the work-life balance that everybody wants to have. So there are a number of things around culture and environment that absolutely matter. And I would say, from what we've heard, this idea of having time to do professional planning and think time, to not be expected to be in ratio like every minute of the day. And again, to have to seek permission to leave for a minute, to make a phone call or go to the bathroom or whatever, it's so diminishing. And it doesn't represent who we want this profession to be.
And if I may, I just want to add one piece to that in relation to the experience. I think one of the things we hear frequently from the public is to value the experience and the longevity of the staff that we have, which does say something about the ability to create a positive work culture in the early childhood environment. It's why people have stayed. They're getting something out of it, and they're benefiting from the work culture and the experience, the joy of teaching. And that's why people are asking us to value that in this conversation. But to Rian's point, that does not put food on the table. And when you're making $35,000 a year, that's not putting food on the table. And many of those folks are receiving other forms of state compensation and support because of the wage. So there's a bit of a circle coming around all the compensation issues. Catherine, I believe your hand was up next. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. This is Catherine Lantigua. Sorry about my camera. So my question to this conversation that we are having is, when are we planning to, not only how are we planning to implement this, but when are we planning to implement this? Because we're not thinking about all of these educators that have been already on the field for 20, 30 years who are almost ready to retire, and they're not thinking about going back to school. So that's my main question.
Yeah, thank you. I think for the panel, that is a comment related to thinking about a transition plan, and Rian raised some of those considerations in her presentation. And so we need to really explore how we get from where we are to where we need to be with the 3 levels in the unifying framework. Thanks, Catherine. Dr. Ferguson.
Thank you. I have 2 thoughts, comments, questions. One around compensation, clearly the center of everything. Wondering if there's some thoughts around tapping into other departments like DCF and K-12, where there's some alignment between what private and community partners do with children that they accept from foster care. And I know there was some language in legislature about Care for Kids and things like that. Just wondering if there's some opportunities to tap into any dollars that may be existing to push over to providers to increase compensation when they do engage in services for children with special needs, for children in foster care and/or reunification, anything like that. The other comment / question is about marketing. We think about the folks, and to Catherine's point, who have been in the field for a long time, talking to them, getting that language, figuring out, of course, yes, compensation has to be addressed for the new generation and for the current generation, but there's people still here. And again, they stayed probably having to rely on other resources, state funding, food stamps, things like that. But there's something else there. What is that something else that attracted them to the field? And maybe with compensation and those words and those emotions, we could do some retention and some recruitment. Again, not suggesting that we attract folks so they could live on, subsidies, but really thinking about not living on subsidies, but attracting those folks with those hearts for children.
Thank you. Garrett, I believe you are next in the sequence. Oh, not hearing you, Garrett. No, still not hearing you. I don't know, maybe I can try to unmute. Let me see.
Now
There
you can
go.
hear it.
Now we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. First, I just wanted to say hello to those who I haven't met before. My background is in state workforce, not early childhood. So if I sound ignorant, there's a decent chance that you're onto something. But I just say that I don't debate the compensation being the core issue here. It's just horrifying to hear how the system works. But I think the people who are the customers and the people who are the workers in the early childhood system understand that the system's broken and that people don't get paid the right amount. So to me, it must be that the influencers, as in legislators, business leaders, and lots of other voters, don't understand the dynamics. So I really think a primary priority should be to try to figure out the best education campaign that we can get. I think a lot of people think early childhood educators are babysitters. It's the only possible explanation that a person with a 4-year degree in early childhood gets 30% less than a kindergarten teacher with the same degree. So I think there's a fundamental step back and try to figure out all that stuff. That so much of what is being recommended here to me sounds like sort of a no-brainer. Which the other thing just generally I would say is I think a big important role we can play as a commission here is to tell people who are in positions of influence how this should be rolled out. If we start off saying compensation has to be changed fundamentally before anything else happens, in my opinion, that won't be an effective strategy. The nonprofit workers in Connecticut campaign constantly for fair wages, and they provide a huge amount of the work that gets done in providing state services. And it's a relatively, to me, opaque sort of pitch. It doesn't come to life. The advantage early childhood has is the stories and the comparisons and everything really can be brought to life. And I think you need to do that first, but you also need to be very specific about all the things that could happen. For example, adopting the framework that we're discussing sounds very, very compelling. I think part of the campaign should be saying some of that, like, here's what we're doing and here's what's going on and we're trying to do. To say that we can't talk about any changes until we talk about comp, I think is kind of it shuts people down from listening on the outside. And again, please take my comments in the spirit in which they're offered.
Understood and heard. Thank you for your thinking. Fran, we're going to come to you.
Yes, I'm going to be very quick, but I want to say yes to the compensation piece. And I think Garrett said it very well. I do think we have to convince others. I'm, trying right now to get I would love to get a campaign going statewide around respect for education, respect for the profession. Generally speaking, K-12, I know that we don't have exactly the same issues, but we do have a respect issue. Everybody thinks that if they went to school, they can tell us how to do things. And I agree with Garrett that in many cases, early childhood is looked upon as babysitting, which of course it is not. The second piece is, forgive me, but my background is very urban. I've only dealt in urban districts or semi-urban. And I would say to you that when my teachers left K-12, when I did exit interviews, many of them left because of the working conditions. They said salary was very secondary. I don't think salary is secondary here, but I do hope that we speak about the working conditions. I'm not an early childhood person, but when I heard you speak about, taking bathroom breaks and always having to be in compliance and working overtime, those are working conditions. And I think, I do think we should address those in the recommendations as well.
I just want to add on, I appreciate that, Fran. And the one thing I want to add on, and that's come up that wasn't really in our thoughts or recommendations that I think we should add just to make a note is this idea of substantial compliance. I think in the military, they have that, we should think about our licensing inspections. And I know what it was like not to be able to go to the bathroom as a teacher of 2-year-olds. You just couldn't leave the room because you had to stay in compliance every single minute. And so I don't exactly know what that looks like, but in terms of working conditions, knowing that we want there to be appropriate staffing, but there might be regulatory items that could improve working conditions. And it might be, I see Phil on the call and I know other people from licensing are here who might be able to help us with that. But I think that's a point that's come up that has not been considered that I think we should consider. Because if I just could have stepped out to go to the bathroom many times, it would have been much easier. And so that idea that the licensor is walking in any minute and everyone's stretched like this all day, for that purpose might be something to consider. So I just wanted to put a highlight on that, not to overlook that point.
I think Fran's raising the issue of working conditions is an important part of the conversation, and recognizing that it looks different in early childhood than K-12 as she has articulated it. And Rian has given a few examples. And I think those of us who've ever worked in a classroom could think of 5 or 6 other examples of basic pieces of working conditions that could make life a little bit more manageable as a classroom teacher. So yeah, working conditions for sure on the list. Catherine, I see that your hand is raised. Is that from before or another point you're ready to share?
I'm so sorry, that's from before.
Oh, okay. That's okay. No worries. So we've explored and started to talk about prioritizing and organizing. I wonder if you all have any questions about pieces that you think additionally are missing from the recommendations. We have framed the 3 buckets and some subpoints within them, but are there other pieces that were perhaps on your mind as strategies that you don't think are incorporated here in the recommendations as they've been put forward that you think the panel should be exploring?
I'm sorry, actually, I do have
There
a
she
quick
is.
question.
Go ahead.
Are we trying to make this mandatory when it comes to early childhood educators going back to school? Are we trying to make this mandatory?
Yeah. So I think part of the answer to this, and Beth, I can't see Beth on my screen right now, but I think part of the answer to your question, Catherine, is in Beth's description of the scope of OEC's influence, that there are, we have a scope of influence over providers because we license them, and we have an increased scope of influence over providers that we fund. And so the process, especially a transition from where we are now to where we are headed, will need to take those things into account, because we cannot influence everything about what happens, especially in the 70% of the industry that is funded privately that does not receive funds from the OEC. And Rian, I wonder if you want to comment.
Yeah.
I know you talk about this a lot with us in the work group, so I
Yeah,
wonder if you want to add
2
to
things
that.
I would say. I mean, to just requiring it, I mean, in essence, yes. So the notion of a license to practice would be that everyone who is working in early childhood education is either an ECE1, an ECE2, or an ECE3, and holds a license to practice in one of those levels. So the intent of the with the model legislation is that it is across the board. Now the question becomes, and there is really long runways built into the model legislation to recognize how, we need debt-free college education. There's a whole set of things that have to happen to make it enticing and interesting. Then to Deb's point, I keep doing that this morning. To Deb's point, if you require a license to practice at each of these 3 levels to be a practicing early childhood educator, but then the private part of the sector you have no influence on how they compensate, we have to wrestle with how do you move the sector to do that. And I hate to say it, but I mean, I don't hate to say it. Here's what you do. The part of the sector that you can influence, you pay the highest reimbursement rates, so that you're driving the competition, quite frankly, in the marketplace to programs that accept childcare subsidy, which then drive educators, the best educators, to those programs. I mean, I think the lever you have that is the most effective is how much you pay for childcare subsidy reimbursement, and then the structure you set up for that system, so that you're paying on enrollment, you're paying with contracts, you're paying in a predictable way. I think that is the biggest influencing point that the state has related to all of this, aside from simply adopting the model legislation.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rian.
So what is ECU1, ECU2? What are the abbreviation meanings?
Early Childhood Educator 1 is 120 training hours. So it's in essence equivalent to a CDA after high school. ECE2 is an associate's degree. An ECE3 is a bachelor's degree or an entry-level master's degree in early childhood education.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Fran, I believe you're next.
Yeah, just a quick comment on, I know that the number of candidates for early childhood has dropped dramatically, but I want to put that in the context of the number of candidates for teaching in general has dropped dramatically. And right now in Connecticut, we're looking at 1,300 openings at the certified teacher level, and more than 1,300 at the paraprofessional level, just in the context of the profession, which is why I'm asking and begging for a campaign on this. That's number one. Number two, there will be a certification task force beginning very soon. And I know Beth has the highest standards, and you all have the highest standards for early childhood, as I do for, I think, for all teachers. But I do think we can streamline some things. And I'm certainly hoping that early childhood is a very viable representative on that task force, so that we are working pre-K-12 to determine what it is that's necessary at the bachelor level as well.
Thank you. Maria. Good morning.
Hi, thank you. Good morning. Just going back to what you were just a few minutes ago, the ECE1, ECE2, and you made comments that the 120 hours of training would be equivalent to the CDA, correct?
Correct.
Rihanna? Okay. But the CDA is on the national level is considered an associate. So I was a bit confused on what you mean by, because if you have a CDA, it's transferable and you go from Connecticut to New Jersey, you can still work with that CDA, that is recognized from one state to another. So I'm a bit confused on when you're saying line stream, which is great, but, and then my next question would be, with the 120 hours, how, what's the thought process when we're thinking about licensing, particularly for family daycare providers? Would that be a requirement before they can become licensed, or through the licensing process? And how long would they, have to complete the 120 hours?
Brian, I think
Mm-hmm.
you look
Yep.
ready to tackle both.
I am. I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
The CDA is not the same as an associate's degree. The CDA can be embedded in an associate's degree program, but an associate's degree requires a full 2 years of education, not the 120 training hours. So, and you're right though. Once you have the CDA credential, it's one of the only portable credentials that we have in this country in early childhood education, which is awesome. So it's a great place to build on. But it is not the same education requirements as an associate's degree. I will say one of the side issues is the path to get a CDA is all over the map. And this is Rhian Alvin talking, in my opinion, and my views are not representing the state of Connecticut or Deb or Beth, but in my opinion, the best CDA programs are the ones that are embedded in community college systems for a variety of reasons, the rigor related to it, the pathway that you are on your way to an associate's degree. I mean, I could tomorrow sign up for a quote unquote CDA training program that I go on a cruise ship for a week and I get my CDA. I mean, literally the training and preparation is all over the map. So I think we have to, that's actually a great role for a registry, quite frankly. So we have to attend to that situation. What was your, so I don't think anyone in Connecticut has decided about the sequencing for a family child care provider. The intent would be, though, if Connecticut adopts the model legislation, you adopt it knowing you've got half a field in essence with no ECE1 equivalent, ECE2 or ECE3. And so there's a 10-year runway built into the model legislation around obtaining those credentials and degrees. So I don't think it's anyone's intent. I know it's not anyone's intent for someone to not be in business or anything like that. Now, for new family child care providers, I mean, this is a decision Connecticut would have to make when they adopt the model legislation. For brand new family child care providers, I would either require a license to practice if you're getting into the field, or I would require a very defined short runway to, at a minimum, get a CDA with a kind of a probationary or provisionary period where you're licensed as a family child care provider. But that is me talking. That is something Connecticut would have to decide.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rhian. So there's a suggestion of a strategy for the panel to continue to think about. I do want to say that we have strong CDA systems connected to credit-bearing coursework in our community college system. The CDA coursework has value and can be carried into the associate degree. So those systems already exist. We have good relationships with our community college systems. Carmelita, who spoke earlier when we were in the full group, is among the leaders in the community college system around CDA credit coursework. And we have a very strong scholarship assistance program that helps people move through that credit-bearing coursework. So those elements are in existence and are at the disposal of the panel for leveraging, expanding, and adjusting to meet the recommendations that are put forward. So I believe we're going to come to the end of our time within the next minute or minute and a half. So I wonder if there are any last words or final thoughts that panel members want to share.
So I have a last question, Deb, just
Sure.
because you said about the CDA and strong systems. So when it comes to the CDA, as a childcare provider, I have my CDA, but there is a lot of childcare providers, especially the Spanish-speaking childcare provider, who cannot find the CDA in Spanish. We only had one teacher who is not, she's retired, and we don't have a Spanish-speaking teacher to teach the CDA. So there isn't a strong system when it comes to the CDA. So how can we make this accessible for these providers who do want to get the CDA but don't have the chance to?
Totally agree with you, Catherine. We are thinking about a number of different strategies, and there is a reference to this in the recommendation about professional pathways to develop dual language or monolingual coursework for folks who speak languages other than English. It's a huge gap, and we know that our field is desperate for that. There are a few resources we're cultivating, and we'll keep working on that while the panel addresses it through recommendations.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So thanks to all of you for your conversations, and I believe you can click that blue bar and we can get back into the main room.